when you take other regulated markets in Brazil, it's pretty much the same, like huge potential, but with structural challenge that need to be faced. I do think that technology has been playing a significant role in that enhancement in the insurance penetration by different channels, but this is not a regular across the industry effect on the different channels.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Brazil is Not for Beginners. Today, my guest is Carlos Azevedo. He is a partner at Pinheiro Neto, one of the leading law firms in Brazil, and the co-head of the insurance practice. In full disclosure, he is also my lawyer at Teddy. He's been working with us, and I'm really excited to have you on today. Cadu, it's a pleasure to have you.
Isaac, it's a great pleasure, excited about this new project. Let's hope I have good answers for you.
Well, like I mentioned, you're the co-lead of the insurance practice. We were talking a little bit before the call that insurance lawyers tend to spend most of their time talking about insurance. We'll try to make this a little bit more broad ranging for the audience out there. And maybe what we can start with is it'd be great to hear a little bit about yourself, your career trajectory, how you came to be interested in law and insurance specifically.
Sure. That's an interesting question because actually I come from a background, a family of engineers. My father he's retired already, a telecommunication engineer, and my mother a chemical engineer. And since I was born, I was the odd one at home that always wanted to talk to people, and I prefer much more people than things. So I mean, it was clear to them that I was not going to be an engineer since the beginning. And then choosing law was just something that happened organically, like naturally. I was inclined to it. I loved history, loved geography, and then it became Portuguese language, and it became something very connected to what I thought was a good background for a lawyer. But then you never actually know what lawyers do. You just see devil advocates, you see the movies, and you think that that's going to be your real life. And I can tell you that I've never been in front of a judge, maybe a couple times as a defendant, but never other than that. So it is not something that you know from the beginning what exactly you're going to do in law. Because law is a very, very wide field. You can work on totally different things. And then coming from Campinas in the countryside of Brazil, I didn't know what to expect. And I learned about the opportunities when I joined the law school at PUC in São Paulo. And then in my professional, when I started the internship in different law firms, when I started working at Pinheiro and I had the broader view of what a transactional lawyer would do, it didn't take me long to understand that was my practice. Like that was where I should focus my attention on, and that's what I have been doing for the last 25 years or 24 years. And I started originally as an M&A lawyer and covered different sectors, different industry, developed very strong private equity client base and focused my attention on insurance. Basically, when we as a firm, I understood that there would be great opportunities in the insurance industry, and we want to capitalize on that. So I was lucky enough to be offered the opportunity of enhancing our transactional insurance practice, which was already well developed, but we wanted to further explore some of the possibilities. And that's how I started doing what I have been doing during the last good 5 years.
That's really interesting. I don't think I can necessarily relate to it, but I think there's worse ways to end up the black sheep in the family than a partner at a law firm. I don't know if your siblings went into engineering as well, but law is also just a great background. I mean, I think about the different degrees that people can pursue and the training that you get, and just having that type of analytical thinking is really great. So going a little bit forward from here, and you talked about how you've been leading this insurance practice for the last 5 years. Insurance is not really the sexiest industry in the world. At the same time, though, it's one of the oldest and steadiest. And beyond that, it can also be a really good barometer for a country's development, financial and otherwise. So I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about the insurance industry locally, and obviously without going into too much detail about the specifics, regulations, maybe some of its unique attributes, unique characteristics, and how those characteristics within insurance also reflect the broader characteristics of doing business in Brazil.
Okay, well, there's a lot to cover that, but let's
I gave you the easy questions, Kadu. That was the idea.
yes, that's it. But let's say that no, I think insurance is an acquired taste. It's something that just like Japanese food, it takes some time for you to understand it, and then really liked it, and after a while it becomes addictive. So it's the same with insurance. Once you understand like the interconnections with the financial industry, the infrastructure development that it can foster, the capacity to potentialize, develop, and affect, in the same way individuals that need some coverage, and the economy in general. Once you take that as a system, and see all the effect that this creates in the economy, it becomes something, I would say, very sexy, and you see the potential of actually affecting the entire ecosystem once the insurance industry is working very integrated with all the other sectors. But obviously, we live in Brazil, and it's a different environment from other places. When you compare to the US or even Europe, the local industry has its challenges, and also with the challenges, the opportunities, as it's often the case in Brazil. We do have local players that are very, very sophisticated, capable of issuing different policies in different environments, and even in foreign jurisdictions. We have more than 20 international players with, substantial, with very relevant local operations, top of the charts, traditional local insurance companies, some of them publicly traded companies that dominate several industry lines, and the bank assurance, which is basically the connection between the banking system and the insurance underwriting in the same segment. That has a huge economic impact. We have seen, I think, recent developments on insure tax, and a continuous sophistication of the brokers, and what we call like MGA-like players, the representantes, the estipulantes, those that actually operate. They're not insurance companies, they don't run the right risk, but they do have kind of operation where they deal with the distribution and actually underwriting and other things as well, but not on behalf of themselves, but acting in close connection with the insurers. But that's the good part, right? That's the part that has been developing, and it's pretty sophisticated, because we have, unfortunately, on the other side, we have products and availability of coverage that are still very, very shy when you compare with the potential that Brazil has, by the number of people, the number of transactions, amount of money and transactions that are continuously done in Brazil. We have very, very, conservative ways to capitalize insurance companies, and obviously that affects the insurance penetration, and leaves a relevant part of the market uncovered. And this reflects a little bit, I think, our challenges and opportunities in several other regulated industry. I think in the banking segment, you do have a different level of the market already, but when you take other regulated markets in Brazil, it's pretty much the same, like huge potential, but with structural challenge that need to be faced.
Yeah, those are really great points. And, just talking about even your first point about how insurance becomes sexier the more you learn about it. I obviously am running an insure tech here in Brazil. And so I've been learning more about it. I didn't start in insurance prior to working on this company, although more generally in financial services. And when you think about it kind of at a fundamental level, it really allows the economy to take risks. So you get insurance so that you can take risks, so that you can do different things, and becomes that underlying engine for growth in a lot of ways. And so it is really, really interesting. And I also really liked what you talked about there in terms of, the players in the market, some of the segments that are being attended, but also some of the segments that aren't being attended. And so going a little bit deeper on this, I've talked to some other people about this, and you and I have talked about this as well, along with the team, is in some ways there's more than one Brazil, geographically, but also economically. One of my previous guests, Gustavo Camargo from Bain, talked about the fact that within Brazil, you have a market equivalent to the size of Canada from a demographic and an economic perspective, just considering the upper classes. But at the same time, if you look beyond that, there's this massive market of unattended and underserved people beyond that. And so I think you see that reflected in insurance and insurance penetration rates. In our segment, in the life insurance segment, it's less than 10% compared with over 50% in the US. And you see this in other segments as well. At the same time, it's still a huge market. You mentioned all the international companies, all the local companies that are here. And so I'm wondering how you think about that dichotomy of the great opportunity and the underserved people with the existing market, the legacy, the historical legacy of Brazil, the historical legacy of some of these traditions, and then at the same time, the emergence of some of these opportunities that you're seeing, specifically around things like new technologies that are making it a little bit more accessible.
Okay, well, again, a lot to unpack. Let's
Again,
let
another easy question.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the easy one by saying that I second Gustavo. Like he's right. We do have a strong upper class that's served with sophisticated products and a large marketplace that remains basically unattended by insurance. Depending on the class of insurance, you are not even able to get a quote for a coverage. So it is a problem that we face, and even in different sectors as well, not only in this industry but in other industries. But I'm not pretentious enough, and lawyers are known for being pretentious, but not enough to try to come with a definitive answer on that. But if I had to face these things and say something to it, it would say that the lack of competition, the insurance price, and the restricted distribution channels would be easy subject to, or easy at least suspects for us to say that they play a role on these difference between the different layers. But these are rather, they're more symptoms than actual causes of the problem, and there are several different factors affecting each one of them. So let's just take these three and try to discuss a little bit on the lack of competition. And this is a very interesting subject because even though we do have strong insurers in Brazil and international players, in the end we have less than 150 insurance companies operating locally, with less than half really driving the market. And a lot of it has to do with the entry barrier to operate in the industry. It's not like starting a software company where in your garage you just develop and you start selling or doing an online, buying and selling products. I mean that's not. It's a regulated industry, and the capital required for a new player to enter the market used to be outrageous. There was a lot of development, but with the segmentation of the insurers, which basically means that you have different layers, and for starting the operations, you don't need to have like the full capacity or a full capital of what we call an S1 insurer. You can have maybe start as an S3 or as an S4 with a significantly reduced regulatory capital that you need to put in the company just to start the operation, in addition to evidence that your controller also has a good financial capacity to sustain the operation in the beginning. In addition to that, you also had the regulatory sandbox, which was a great initiative from SUSEP. We are already in the second cohort of the program. We're moving to a third one from what we heard from SUSEP. And this took it even further because the regulatory capital required and also the level of internal systems that you would need to have is reduced. And that facilitates the entrance of new players. And then you have, other regulations that they don't necessarily affect. It's not only about people that want to underwrite risk, but people that gravitate around it. So you have more freedom now in the new regulations about representantes and estipulantes, which often works as our own version of an MGA. And this allows players to operate in the industry with much more freely. And all these initiatives combined will probably foster the competition in the long term or even in the medium term. I mean, this is something that's already starting to affect the industry. On the insurance price, I mean, this is in several cases often the effect of a lack of competition. But if we're talking about an unattended layer of the market, this has probably more to do with the ability of the players to operate and the benefits they can extract from such layer than actually, a competition that doesn't exist. Because if there was the opportunity and they were able to basically make money out of these opportunities, they would do so. And that's probably more to do with the cost of capital than with actually competition. And this is a big problem that we have in Brazil. The lack of more sophisticated financial instruments, or actually financing instruments to fund insurance companies, like what you had in the US, the ILS. We do have our own version. It's the LRS, which is basically an instrument that the insurers can use to sell insurance linked securities that would result in money out of the insurance industry entering the insurance industry and being used to underwrite risk. This is something that hasn't developed yet in Brazil, and also the insurance companies, once they receive the funds and start underwriting the risk, they need to set reserves to basically be ready once the risks occur, when you have the losses happening. And the restrictions on how the insurance companies can invest their what we call regulatory reserves, they are, let's say, higher in Brazil than they are in other jurisdictions. And once you connect those two things, like the capital that needs to enter the company doesn't have a lot of alternatives for you to actually go after different people to put monies in the insurance companies, and also the fact that once the money is in the company, you need to invest in very traditional products. This increases the cost of capital. So this is a delicate balance
Yeah,
because if you
yeah, it's really interesting.
it is.
I find it interesting. I find it interesting because I look at it as a parallel in a lot of ways. Before starting Teddy, I was a fintech consultant and did a lot of work in Brazil. And go back to the early 2000s or kind of the mid 2000s when there used to be a dichotomy or a duopoly rather in Brazil for Visa and MasterCard. And on the acquiring side, which is the people that accept the money, the people at the restaurants that have the machines, it was just a Visa acquirer and a MasterCard acquirer. And every store had two machines because you could only run a card on one or the other. And how the central bank opened that up and how that's led to a tremendous amount of more competition. Companies like Nubank and eBanks and all the companies that we all read about. And so that was when I was thinking about what company to start and talking with my partner and talking with you about different things. It's one of the things that attracted me about insurance was it seems like it's on the cusp of a similar type of opening, if you will.
Yeah, no, it is, and that's why I said, it's an acquired taste. Once you get into these items and you start actually understanding it, I find it fascinating. But there is an interesting balance here, right? Because on the one side, the government needs to regulate, like the agencies need to regulate and make sure that people are not playing wild cards with money that is supposed to be used to actually pay indemnification once there is a loss. But on the other side, you don't want to make it too tight so that people cannot actually have a more efficient way to manage the money. So this is a balance. But I believe what we have in Brazil is it's more inclined to a conservative approach, and perhaps we could benefit from some more flexibility, and this would reduce the cost of capital and perhaps reduce as well the price of insurance. And just to cover another aspect that I think is relevant for affecting a different layer of the market, as I know is one of your drives, the distribution channel is key. Like with the size that we have in Brazil, with the number of industry and the number of people that we have living here, that's why the bank assurance is such a powerhouse in Brazil, because you're basically already connected in the banking system. Everyone has a bank account, or almost everyone has a bank account in Brazil. It's much easier to sell the products in that distribution channel than in other channels. And I do think that technology has been playing a significant role in that enhancement in the insurance penetration by different channels. But this is not a regular across the industry effect on the different channels, right? Because let's say you want insurance for your mobile phone. I mean, you already buy insurance using your own mobile phone. So that's an easy one for technology. However, when you move to more rural concerns like crop insurance, it is not the same way. Like you're not going to sell this product in the same way. You will need to uh, basically affect the client or get in touch with the client using a different means, perhaps a credit company that's going to offer credit to them, or a retailer that's going to sell a certain product, and then you can be in that environment. So this process, it will develop because there is money to be made, and when there's money to be made, there will be people interested in doing so. There is also artificial intelligence that will probably play a significant role in helping collecting data that will help with the offer of new products to different consumers. But these will also require the potential distribution channels that some of them are either unused now or they are used below what's their potential. Once they understand the impact and the benefits and the opportunities that they can have by also bringing additional insurance for their distribution channels that perhaps already distribute a different product, but they would also include insurance. This, I think, has a huge potential. It's a barrier that we need to cross to make it more, to increase the penetration. And this is already actually a process in motion, right? When you look at some of the channels, and we do have very relevant clients that work exactly on that retail and also on some very specific fields, they are taking much more care, and they're looking with much more attention of their insurance products or the potential to distribute insurance. So we have seen a lot of players from totally other industry turning to insurance and looking, listen, this is great. I understand now that this can connect to my ecosystem. how can I actually enhance or improve the potential for this line of business in my own distribution channel. And we're already seeing that happening.
There's really great points, especially at the end, in terms of what you mentioned around how companies are thinking of adding on insurance products to products they're already offering, including them in their distribution channels. We're obviously having some of those conversations, as you know, from what we talk about. And what I see beyond that is something that's come up in some of the other discussions I've been having here around financial education. And insurance is not the first product that people think of. And I think that we're in a wave now where we've gone through with companies like Nubank and PagSeguro and some of the other companies that people that follow Brazil in the financial system will know. We're getting to the point where people have now banking accounts. They're getting used to it. Somebody specifically that doesn't have a large income on thinking about risk in the medium or long term is hard. Convincing them of paying money, betting something won't happen is hard. And so using these distribution channels is really interesting. And I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add here. I don't have a specific question on it, but I think this topic of financial education is really fascinating, and insurance ties into that. And it comes back to that point I was trying to make about insurance in some respects being a barometer of economic development as people move along the financial chain and get, I hate the word sophisticated, but more sophisticated around financial products and financial solutions, they adopt insurance in higher levels.
Yes, I think it is a great point, Isaac, because when you look at insurance, you only tend to think of the first insurance that comes to mind, like, oh, insurance, then it's auto insurance. I mean, that's the first thing that you have in mind. But once you see the possibilities and the different lines of products and how much perhaps a transaction or something that would not happen otherwise, like the parties in the transaction would not be comfortable enough to basically run that risk. Once you bring another one that's actually more specialized sometimes than both parties involved, and they can say, yeah, I've seen a lot of that, I have the data, I've been studying it, I can underwrite this risk, I will basically charge you X, and you're able to do a transaction that otherwise you would not able to do so. And that's very, very, very interesting. Like, you can offer products that are, sometimes people don't think of the product as insurance, but the motor, that's the engine that's behind it, is an insurance. So they just see like the part that basically they interact with. It's, oh yeah, if that happens, I will get some money, or this will allow me, as yourself know very well, like this will allow me, in case I have, I want to take a day off during my anniversary, to go off with my family, and perhaps also have enough money because of a separate product that I had that would provide me with the funds for that. I mean, there are different things that can happen if someone suffers an accident, and perhaps they are just thinking about, oh, it's myself, like I'll have a health insurance or something like that. But perhaps you could have, even in a product that's not associated with a car, an effect of the car over your income that can be remunerated or can be compensated by an insurance product that covers your life. So you can actually have different coverage coming from different things. And when you bring into that also what we call assistência in Brazil, which is basically the service that connect to that, and it's the when you're not with your keys and you call someone to open the door in your house, or perhaps you have a problem with your battery in your car, and that's not directly related sometimes with your car, but that's basically a protection that you gain from a certain insurance for life, or a certain insurance of auto, or a certain insurance of your house, that affects other things around your life, like other things that you're not specifically covering. That's interesting. Like, you see the insurance touching you in a personal way.
I agree. And I think we could go a lot deeper on some of these things and how technology in specific is affecting how insurance is sold, how you need to be more of a concierge when you sell insurance and not just the product because that's being commoditized. I think there's a lot we can do here. I think we've nerded out enough for the audience on insurance specifically. Hopefully, everybody's still with us and enjoying. But generally speaking, you also do a lot of work beyond just insurance. And you've mentioned to me you have a lot of international clients. You mentioned the work that you've been doing in M&A for over 20 years. And so I'm wondering, kind of going a little bit more general, what are some of the common misperceptions you see in working with clients coming to Brazil for the first time, for the second time? What are some of the most common things you have to teach them that you find yourself repeating, even beyond business, when you're introducing Brazil and getting people used to being in Brazil? One of the things for me, I like food. And so learning about moqueca and the richness of Brazilian cuisine has been really interesting. I remember specifically an episode of Top Chef where they had a world day and the person had to cook Brazilian cuisine and they didn't know what to make because they didn't know what Brazilian cuisine was. And I come here and I find out about moqueca and bobo de camarão and all of the delicious foods that's not just meat. And so I'm wondering what you have to, both in business and outside of business, what you find yourself repeating to these international clients.
Well, food is an easy subject, right? Because like the fact that Brazil is so diverse and we receive the immigrants from all over the world. Like I have probably myself 5 or 6 different backgrounds. I mean, inherents from different places in the world. Even though everyone thinks that they are Italian and Portuguese and Spanish in Brazil, but you know we're mixed from a lot of places. But all those immigrants, when they came to Brazil, they brought a lot of culture, a lot of ways to interact, and naturally, food is one of the things that gets preserved over time because even though you start using local ingredients, you start mixing, you try different things, you still try to go back to the recipe of your mother, the recipe that you remember from your childhood, and that keeps. So we may have some things that we do in Japanese food, for instance, that the Japanese, when they come to Brazil, they would be very, very annoyed by cream cheese and other things that we put on sushi. But other than that, you still preserve like a very good background from food from all over the world. Now I think you have more Japanese restaurants in São Paulo than Italian places, which used to be the norm. And then you have meat. A lot of people that eat and very good barbecue in Brazil, and obviously the quality and the availability of the ingredients do make a different standards when you compare to other parts in the world. You can cook whatever recipe you want in Brazil using only local ingredients, or at least ingredients that are available locally. But that's food, right? That's the easy one. It's what we do after a busy day or even in the middle of the day. But I think one going more to business people, one thing that they get very surprised by is the sophistication of our banking system. When I moved to the US about 10 years ago, it was I had to relearn how to write down checks, like bank checks, because this is something that I hadn't done for a long, very long time in Brazil before that. So I need to pay my internet, I need to pay everything using checks, and I didn't have any in Brazil for quite some time. So the Pix that we have here, like you pay and immediately it's available in a bank account. All that in some jurisdictions are even in very sophisticated jurisdictions. It's not things that they deal with on a daily basis. And when you have a foreigner and you see the level in sophistication in the banking system, they're very often surprised.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something I think we've touched on a few of the other topics circling around how important fintech is in Brazil and how it's become a real leader there. As you mentioned earlier, the large number of both global and local players in the insurance space, but in other sectors as well. I'm wondering in the work in your insurance practice as well as in the M&A practice, what are some of the things that the successful global players have done really well in coming to Brazil? And at the same time, what are some of the things that you've seen more common in the companies that have not been as successful in coming into Brazil and the companies trying to build a local presence?
All right, another interesting question, but let's tackle it.
I gave you the food question, which was easier. So this was now I have to make it a hard one again.
It was. It was. Let's go. Let's go. So I think in terms of business, the international players that understand that tropicalization, as we say in Brazil, of business models and products is required. And they allow local teams to drive the implementation, but yet they supervise the process. These players, they tend to be much more successful. There is a mixture between supervising and allowing local people to actually that know the rules of the land and know how things operate to basically help with the implementation. I think one of the great cases of success that we have in Brazil is Bank Capital's investment in Intermedica. This is a great example. They acquired, they made the growth, and they exit. I had the opportunity of experiencing that in firsthand. They had a very strong local team that were basically driving all the implementation, and a very committed investor that would come often, that would have board members participating frequently, that would supervise the process, helping with opportunities, but yet allowing people to drive the implementation. And then on the other hand, we had about 10 years ago, there was an initial attempt to implement what we call reps and warrants insurance in Brazil that would basically cover the unknown liabilities of an M&A, basically what is not foreseen in the reps and warranties. And basically, if that would happen and it was not known by the parties, I mean, that would be covered. Then basically nothing has happened or very little has happened since then. If you go to the US market and in Europe, this is almost like the norm for an M&A involving private equity companies and also in other industries. So this is something that worldwide has become a very important tool in the toolbox of the M&A lawyers. And yet in Brazil, we have only a few insurance being issued a year. Um, I think that even though the M&A market is relevant and would have all the elements to allow the development of these products, there are peculiarities in the local SPAs, the way we do M&As in Brazil, that do require the adaptation of international products. If you just take an international product and put it in Brazil, I mean, that's what they tried to do 10 years ago. But the combination of different lines of insurance, some flexibility on the exclusions that you would traditionally include, and perhaps some more appetite to underwrite risk that otherwise you would be a bit skeptical about. These would be important elements, and I see this happening right now with much more strategy, both from insurers and brokers that are driving this process, and they are actually committed to improve the use of this product in Brazil. And as an M&A lawyer in the insurance industry myself, I'm very, very excited about it because I think there is a potential for changing the way, or at least adding another instrument to the M&A SPAs in Brazil and the M&A transactions.
Really interesting points there. And I think that what you're talking about ties into somewhat recurring topics here on the people that I talk to. One of them, like you said, with the example of Bain Capital, is the long term commitment to being in Brazil, to being on the ground, to getting to know how things work, to being involved, but also giving space for local people to work. On the other side, I don't know enough about the reps and warranties and how that worked. That sounded a little bit technical. But I think one of the things that's come up and that we've talked around here a little bit is bureaucracy and the role of bureaucracy in Brazil. And I think anybody that has done any work in Brazil is used to the bureaucracy here. At the same time, we've been talking a little bit about the innovation agendas of some of these different agencies. So we talked about the fintech space and how pro innovation the central bank has been in terms of trying to increase access and increase competition. The insurance regulator has had a similar agenda, although a few years after the central bank. How do you look at the work of some of these more pro innovation agencies, and what areas of development get you excited with regard to insurance and in other sectors?
Yeah, yeah. So we had recent regulations and changes in the regulations that allow the development of more business and more ways to do business. So the segmentation was one because it really helped new players to enter the market. The regulatory sandbox is definitely another one. It had not only the effect of bringing in whomever was waiting to join a regulatory sandbox and wanted to be an insurance company, but it refreshed the market a little bit in players like the brokers, MGAs, other players that didn't want to underwrite risk, but they gravitate around these environments. They start also developing more innovative solutions and try to see what the insurtechs in the sandbox were doing in order to basically take those innovations and put into their own business. So this is an interesting side effect of the regulatory sandbox, in addition to the regulatory sandbox itself that accepted in the first and in the second cohort a lot of new players that are able to underwrite risk. Then you have also some rules that allow players that are not underwriting risk, but they, as I said, gravitate around the insurance companies and other players. They have more freedom now with the regulations for estipulante, representante, to basically operate in the market and take advantage of such freedom to basically create new models and try to bring in new products. So I see that happening a lot as well. And there are others, okay, in the insurance. I don't want to get too specific about the items, but the agenda in the last, say, 5, maybe even 10 years has been pretty proactive and pretty good for the industry in the long term. Those things take time to mature. So we are in a time where some of it is already starting to generate, results, but it will take more time for us to have a full spectrum of what results came out of these initiatives. And then we have a very big initiative, the Open Finance, which is basically the combination of the open insurance and the open banking. It has huge potential, also has some challenges because it's naturally not easy for you to have basically an environment where we're actually forced to exchange information about clients, but it has a potential because of the way you can transfer information and make people that want to provide a better or a more competitive product to use information from other players that already have this information instead of having to basically develop its own information or capture its own information from that client using other means. And this has potential of improving competition as well and may have a very relevant impact long term. But let's see how this plays in the long run. I know that there is some objection about the open insurance, but I do believe in the initiative. It just needs to be well balanced. Another one that actually the enforceability of guarantees. I mean, something that has been developing in Brazil as well, and this is often a hidden cost. Events like what happened in the retail market with a very important retailer failing and undergoing reorganization. These had an effect across industries, even in the insurance industry, because of the effect of a big retailer basically starting to pay, or actually some of the insurance that it had been resulting in loss, that reduced the capacity of some of the international players to make available lines for Brazil. So if we improve on enforceability of guarantees, rule of law, and all those things that are little by little, I see some development. Those things can also generate a good impact, and I think that this is like more structural. You don't see the result immediately, but it does create a result long term. And what you said about bureaucracy, that's the big problem, I think. Now, the bureaucracy in Brazil, and I do understand its reasons, obviously, because you want to protect somehow consumers and protect the market, but the bureaucracy is a killer. For new initiatives, it increases a lot the cost for you to not only to start a new business, but to start a new operation and even to run an existing operation. And often, this bureaucracy disregard the basic concepts of law and economics, and you have to spend a lot of money on things that are totally like transaction cost. It doesn't create any benefit. This money would be much more well invested in actually development of products, availability of products, pricing. But that's a burden that we still carry. But you know me, I'm optimistic, and I do think that technology will solve a lot of the villains that we still face.
Yeah, this Custo Brasil, the cost of Brazil is real, but hopefully diminishing over time. Really great insights on the innovation agenda, on some of the things that are coming. Obviously, challenges are coming up ahead, but I think a lot of people are excited about these similar challenges like you are. Changing gears a little bit, I'm also curious, maybe more on a personal level than anything else, about practicing law in Brazil with foreign companies, tying into this idea of bureaucracy and the rule of law. I think Brazil has more lawyers per capita than any other country, if I remember correctly. And law is so much about language and interpretation. And you always hear these discussions about, is it the letter of the law or the spirit of the law? But I'm curious how you manage all of that working across languages and cultures and systems, especially in such a bureaucratic and legalistic country.
Yeah. So I guess that's probably the reason why we have so many lawyers. Like it's so complicated, so intricate that you produce so many lawyers. But the reality is that even though the legal systems in different jurisdictions, the rules are different, there is more similarity than difference because they're all based on how the society is organized, and we're still all Homo sapiens, and we all have the same kind of problems. We all have the discussions about house. We all have the discussions about protection. We all have the discussion about purchase and sale. And then you have the specific rules that most of the cases they have the same roots and they share a similar concepts. But the key for lawyers working across multiple jurisdictions is to have a good understanding of the different systems and to know how to translate the difference in their clients and also share what is the local culture. Most of the lawyers from our firms they have the opportunity of doing a master in law in the US or in Europe and working as a foreign associate in another jurisdiction. I had this opportunity myself. I went to the University of Chicago and then spent a year in New York working at Kirkland and Ellis. And I believe that these together with our training program, this provides our lawyers with a very good foundation that serve well our international clients.
Great answer. Answered like a lawyer. I appreciate that. Um, a couple questions that I like to ask my guests here as we wrap up. The name of the podcast is Brazil is Not for Beginners, which is the famous quote from Tom Jobim. What does that mean to you when you hear people say it, when you probably say it to some of your clients?
Well, that's the easiest one. This is the truth. Like, there are lots of opportunities for those capable of facing the challenges.
Great, succinct answer. I really like it. And then, as a last question here, are there any particular parts of Brazilian culture or are there any Brazilian expressions that you particularly like? I know you and I have talked because you mentioned you have a small child at home. I have a small child at home, and how much Brazilians love children is something that I think is really unique to Brazil. So I'm wondering if there's other things that stand out to you, or if there's a quote that you think speaks really well to Brazil. Anything that you can share with the audience as they are trying to learn about Brazil, obviously by listening to this podcast.
So Brazilians, they take things very personally. This is an interesting question because when you see a response from someone that's very straight to the point, often people think that they're probably mad at us, and sometimes it's not. It's just the way people communicate. But that has a lot to do with the way meetings start in Brazil. When you take the coffee in the beginning of the meeting, it's as important sometimes as the actual discussion itself. Knowing a little bit about your counterpart or your client, and people are not afraid of sharing some personal things like, "Well, I have a daughter, I have a son, we were going to the beach this weekend." I mean, simple things like that create a connection that I think has a lot to do with the background. Like, we are a nation formed by immigrants. When immigrants, they go to a place, like, they need to establish the connections between themselves, and I think that that's somehow intertwined into our DNA. Like, it's something that's, whenever there is a Brazilian, and if there is like five people around, I mean, they cannot stand just looking at each other. They will start talking. I think it has a lot to do with this feeling that we now need to connect because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. I better have a friend nearby in case something happens. And this translates, I think, into business. This translates into the kind of interactions that you may have with your neighbor. If you don't say hello to people, I mean, your neighbors, they will look at you and think, maybe they don't like me. And sometimes it's just, people don't think about that. And I had the opportunity of living in other places as well, and I could feel that. You walk in London, you walk in Chicago, you walk in New York. They're all incredible cities, but people are more reserved naturally in some places more than in others. But it is definitely different from what we have in Brazil. And kids are a very important part of that. I know you have a recent newborn. Myself, I have one as well. And everyone wants to give you advice, wants to talk about, wants to help. No one wants to help during the night. That's something that I would love for someone to take, but that's all fine. But there is this interesting feeling, and over time, I think it's also beneficial to the kids because the kids start having a network that helped in the way they were brought up, that over time, make them more sociable and help for them to interact with other kids as well. I think it's just our way to do things. I really like that we do this way, maybe because I was born here, but I think there is, for you as a foreigner and coming here and having experienced this, maybe you can talk more about that than I can talk myself because I was immersed this since when I was born.
Great points about that, how Brazilians take things personally, and how you need to establish that personal connection. I think that that's really important here and something that I've learned. I don't think I'm terrible at it. Obviously, can get better. And the points about children and the your children don't belong to you; they belong to the community. At least during the day, like you said, at night nobody wants them, but it would be great to get that help. But that's part of being a parent. Fadu, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciated the opportunity to nerd out a little bit about insurance. There were a lot of paths we could have taken to go a lot deeper. If anybody in the audience would like to reach out to you, how should they do that? How can they find you to go deeper on some of these topics that were really interesting here?
Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity. It was great. We have been interacting for quite some time, and I always loved our chats, not only about insurance, but about other things as well. So thank you for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to the project. Like, when you launch all the podcasts, I'm going to be probably one of the ones that are going to listen to them more often whenever I go to the gym or whenever I go for a run. I'll make sure I have it on number one on my list. Well, if anyone wants to talk to us, you can have a look at our website at Pinheiro Neto and just search for it on the internet. It will appear. You can also reach for me at LinkedIn, and you can find me, Carlos Eduardo Gazineu de Azevedo. Happy to talk to you about insurance and in general.
Great. Kadu, thanks so much. I hope everybody enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a great one. Bye bye.
Thanks again for joining us. This podcast was hosted by me, Isaac Matzner. It was produced by Amanda Villela and edited by Veronica Medina. You can find more episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as on our Substack page. We love feedback, so please feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email at Brazil, the number 4, beginners@gmail.com.